Hi, welcome. The second video is a quick dive into the simple tool I put together to ultimately help me to approximate acceptable mark values for the 50 most common missiles in DCS. This also constitutes a method to assess partial WEZ, partial because only low TA has been analyzed, and only from the perspective of the MAR. The original plan was building a more complete model with considerations about long-range employment and characteristics and so on, and on top of that, the of course all aspect study. To get the tool, click on the URL you find in the article, linked into descriptions, and the tool will be copied to your Google Drive account. As you can see, it is basically a simple query on a different spreadsheet. You can select up to 3 missiles, and the chart is fed accordingly. If you're interested in only a specific subset of altitude ranges, you can select them for the checkboxes in the top right corner. Obviously, as no scripts are running in the background, the colors get a bit mixed up, but nothing you can't change yourself. The chart represents range on the abscissa and speed at impact on the ordinate. The speed is used as a mean to extremely simplify the quantification of the missile performance. As discussed before, a WEZ or LAR model for DCS should include at least all aspects, not only 0. Unfortunately, I have a lot on my ludic plate now, so despite me being the numberophile, I stopped to the bare minimum necessary to approximate a MAR in a video game. The modus operandi behind the determination of the minimum about range was briefly mentioned in the previous video. To quickly recap, the missiles were fired by an AI aircraft flying at Mach 1 and employing against an almost static target. This decouples and minimizes the impact of VC as a variable. Then I have eyeballed the pattern describing the performance limits of the static missiles, and then added a somewhat appropriately named safety buffer. I set this buffer to 5 nautical miles, but feel free to adjust it if you think it's too tight or too abundant. The ultimate result is a value that, if respected, assures relative safety to the defending aircraft. Relative because long-range missile launches are not necessarily defeated by defending at MAR, and they can reach their respective aim long before that. Unfortunately, the lack of a complete WEZ model means that we need to use our experience to evaluate the other parts of the model itself. In fact, what you're looking at is a sort of side view of the model. We do not have enough data to create a common top-down representation. For example, if we wanted to compare the M120C5 against the M54C Mach 47, we would see the WEZ model of the Phoenix is probably shorter an hour. Why? Because we know that the relative length of the WEZ model due to the tool I made is shorter than the Ambram, and we know that the Ambram suffered drags much less while maneuvering, whereas the Phoenix is literally a brick, twice as big, 3 times heavier. These peculiarities drastically decrease the performance of the missile against known-odd targets. Besides the actual numbers that you can study on your own depending on what you are interested in, there is a very evident pattern I would like to show you. Namely, it involves the difference between MAR values as the altitude decreases. The chart displayed shows each missile studied versus the difference between MAR at 35,000 feet minus MAR at 25,000 feet, then 25,000 feet minus 15,000 feet, and lastly 15,000 feet minus 5,000 feet. It is evident how the difference between 25,000 feet and 50,000 feet is minimal, whereas diving from 35,000 feet to 25,000 feet grants the greatest gain. Or, from a different perspective, the missiles performs worse. So, if you're defending at high altitude, unloading and diving to 25,000 feet can noticeably help to kinematically defeat the missile, whereas the same can be said if you dive from 25,000 feet to 15,000 feet. It would be interesting to add more steps to this model. This would tell us if the just discussed phenomenon behaves differently between 35,000 feet and 30,000 feet, and between 30,000 feet and 25,000 feet. Would it be linear or exponential, for example? Unfortunately, I don't have time for that at the moment. Next one will probably be the updated simplified timeline, and this is my priority. Although, it won't probably be as simple as the one I put together in the end of 2019. Thanks for watching and take care.